I'm not pure, the castle maid said, as the great hall fell silent. The chandeliers trembled in the draught, and whispers cut through the air like knives. Everyone believed her life was ruined, that no prince would ever look her way again. But in that moment, the prince did something no one expected. Instead of turning from her shame, he stepped closer and spoke words that defied the entire court. Yet behind the candlelight and polished crowns, danger was already stirring. A jealous noblewoman knows the maid's darkest secret, and she's ready to use it to destroy her forever dot as scandal spreads through the castle. Hearts and thrones hang in the balance. Will love strong enough to cross the walls of class, survive the weight of betrayal? Or will one whispered past shatter a kingdom's future? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The morning sun had barely crept through the castle's narrow windows when Magda knelt on the cold kitchen flagstones. Her rough wool skirts pooled around her as she scrubbed. The vast kitchen, with its copper pots gleaming in the early light and herbs hanging from wooden beams, echoed with the sounds of servants beginning their daily tasks. Harder, girl. The head housekeeper's sharp voice cut through the air. Those stones won't clean themselves of their sins, much like some people. I know. Magda's hands tightened on the scrub brush, but she kept her head down, focusing on the stubborn marks beneath her. The soap suds couldn't wash away the sting of the housekeeper's words, nor the whispers that followed her like shadows through the castle corridors. Two young maids huddled near the bread ovens, their heads close together as they shaped dough, their voices carrying just loud enough for Magda to hear. Did you know about her baby? One whispered, poorly hiding her gossip behind a flour-dusted hand. Born with no father to claim it, they say, and it didn't even live. The other replied with ghoulish fascination. That's why she's here now, fled from her village in shame. The brush scraped against stone as Magda fought back tears. 6 years had passed, but grief knew no time. The memory of her tiny daughter, perfect and still, remained as fresh as yesterday's bread. I am not pure, Magda murmured to herself, her voice barely a whisper above the scrubbing. I am not. Why would you say such a thing about yourself? The deep, gentle voice froze every hand in the kitchen. Magda's heart stopped as she looked up to find Prince Alaric standing in the doorway, his tall frame backlit by morning sun. His kind eyes met hers with an intensity that made her quickly lower her gaze. The head housekeeper rushed forward, bobbing in a deep curtsy. Your Highness, we did not expect, that is, the kitchen is no place for. I go where I please in my own castle, Alaric said firmly, though his voice remained gentle. He stepped closer to where Magda knelt, still frozen in place. And I will not stand by while anyone in my household speaks of themselves with such harshness. The kitchen had fallen silent as a tomb. Even the bread ovens seemed to hold their breath. Magda could feel every eye upon her, could sense the scandal building like storm clouds. My lord, she managed, her voice trembling, you are too kind. But no. Alaric's bootsteps echoed as he crossed to her. Kindness is not too much for any soul. Stand up, please. With shaking legs, Magda rose, keeping her eyes fixed on the prince's polished boots. Her rough hands, red from scrubbing, clutched her apron. Look at me, he commanded softly. When she raised her eyes, she found no judgment in his face, only a warmth that made her heart flutter like a trapped bird. Your worth is not measured by your past, he said, loud enough for all to hear, but by the goodness in your heart, which I have observed in your care for others. A gasp rippled through the kitchen. The young maids nearly dropped their dough. The head housekeeper's face had turned the color of sour milk. Now, Alaric continued, addressing the room at large, I trust everyone here will remember that God alone may judge, and return to their duties accordingly. With a final gentle smile at Magda, he turned and left the kitchen as suddenly as he had appeared. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Then the whispers began anew, more urgent than before. A prince, speaking so to a common maid? And one with her history? That night, lying on her thin straw mattress in the servants' quarters, Magda stared up at the rough wooden rafters. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the roof tiles, painting silver patterns above her head. "Dear God," she whispered into the darkness, "please lift this shame from my heart. Please forgive my sins." But even as she prayed, she could not forget the way Prince Alaric had looked at her, as if she were worthy, as if her past did not matter. His gaze haunted her thoughts like a persistent flame, refusing to be extinguished by either prayer or reason. Dawn painted the castle gardens in shades of pearl and gold. Prince Alaric walked alone among the dew-kissed roses, his boots leaving dark prints on the grass. The morning air carried the sweet scent of blooming flowers, but his thoughts were elsewhere, drawn back to a night 12 years ago, when fever had nearly claimed his young life. He paused beside a weathered stone bench, touching its cool surface as memories washed over him. He had been just a boy of 10, burning with fever that no physician could break. The castle had held its breath, waiting to see if their young prince would survive until morning dawned. But then there was Magda. She had been barely more than a girl herself, newly arrived to work in the kitchens. While others wrung their hands in despair, she had stayed by his bedside through the darkest hours, placing cool claws on his brow and whispering prayers into the night. "Please, merciful Father," she had murmured, thinking him too deep in fever to hear, "spare this child. Take my happiness if you must, but let him live." Alaric's hand tightened on the bench. He had never forgotten those words, nor the pure heart that spoke them. Now, seeing her again after so many years, treated with such disdain by those who should show Christian charity, it stirred something profound in his soul. With renewed purpose, he strode toward the laundry yard. The morning routine of the castle would put her there, he knew. Among the fresh linens and morning breeze, he found her exactly as he had hoped, hanging white sheets that billowed like sail canvas in the wind. Her brown hair was tied back simply, wayward strands dancing around her face as she worked. Even in her plain dress and apron, she moved with a grace that caught his eye. "Good morrow, Magda," he said softly, not wishing to startle her. She spun around, nearly dropping the sheet in her hands. "Your Highness!" Color flooded her cheeks as she dropped into a deep curtsy. Forgive me, I did not see you approach. Please, rise." Alaric stepped closer, his heart quickening as she straightened. "I have been thinking of a night long ago, when a brave young girl sat beside my sickbed and prayed for my life." Magda's hands trembled on the damp linen. "My lord remembers that?" "I remember everything." His voice grew gentle. "The cool claws on my brow, the prayers you whispered when you thought I could not hear. You bargained with God for my life, offering your own happiness in exchange." Tears gathered in her eyes, though she tried to blink them away. "It was nothing, Your Highness. Any servant would have done the same." "No," Alaric shook his head. "Not as you did. Not with such pure devotion." He took another step closer, close enough to see the flutter of her pulse at her throat. "I have often wondered if God took you at your word that night. If the sorrows you have endured were the price of my life." "Please," Magda whispered, her voice breaking. "A prince should not speak so to a mere maid. It isn't proper. The others will talk. Let them talk." But even as he said it, Alaric saw the fear in her eyes, the way she glanced anxiously toward the castle windows. He understood her position was precarious enough without royal attention drawing more gossip. With careful movements, he withdrew a folded piece of parchment from his jacket. "I copied this last night, thinking of you." He pressed it into her palm, letting his fingers brush hers for just a moment. "Words that I pray might bring you comfort." Magda stared at the parchment as if it were made of gold, not daring to open it. I cannot accept. You can, and you will. Alaric smiled gently. Consider it a very late thank you for the night you saved my life. Footsteps approached from the direction of the kitchen. Magda quickly tucked the parchment into her apron pocket, her eyes wide with alarm. Until we meet again, Alaric said softly, then turned and walked away with measured steps, as if he had merely been inspecting the laundry yard in passing. He heard the approaching servants break into excited whispers as soon as they thought him out of earshot. Let them whisper, he thought. Some things were worth any amount of gossip. That evening, as darkness fell over the castle like a velvet cloak, Magda finally allowed herself to remove the precious parchment from her pocket. She sat on her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, waiting until the other maids had fallen asleep before unfolding it with trembling fingers in the prince's elegant hand. She read the words, "The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit." Psalm 34, verse 18. Tears spilled onto her cheeks as she traced the letters with one finger. How had he known exactly what her heart needed to hear? With reverent care, she slipped the parchment beneath her thin pillow, smoothing it flat. "The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart," she whispered into the darkness, even as anxiety tightened around her chest like iron bands. Already she had heard the whispers growing through the castle. The prince speaking privately with a maid? And not just any maid, but one with her history? But even as fear threatened to overwhelm her, her fingers found the edge of the hidden parchment, and she clung to its promise like a lifeline in the storm. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was hope even for a heart as broken as hers. Candlelight danced across polished silverware as nobles filled the castle's grand hall for the evening meal. Tapestries rustled against stone walls, and the murmur of refined conversation mixed with the soft clink of crystal goblets. At the head table, the Dowager Duchess sat straight-backed in her chair, her gray hair arranged perfectly beneath a lace cap, her dark silk gown rustling as she raised her hand for silence. "My lords and ladies," she announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet hall. "As you know, the security of our realm depends upon a clear succession. It is time for Prince Alaric to take a bride from among the noble houses." Alaric, seated at her right hand, kept his face carefully blank as whispers rippled through the assembly. His fingers tightened around his goblet as his mother continued, listing the names of suitable young ladies from the highest-ranking families: Lady Catherine of the Western Provinces, Lady Eleanor of Blackamoor, and, of course, our own lovely Lady Selene. The Dowager concluded with a satisfied nod toward the beautiful noblewoman seated near the front. The prince's attention wandered as servants moved quietly among the tables. His heart caught when Magda appeared, pitcher in hand, her simple black dress and white apron a stark contrast to the ladies' elaborate gowns. She moved with quiet grace, keeping her eyes downcast as she refilled wine glasses. As she approached the head table, Alaric could not help but watch her. The soft glow of candles caught the copper highlights in her dark hair, and her hands remained steady as she poured his wine. For just a moment, their eyes met, and the rest of the hall seemed to fade away. But they were not alone in that moment of connection. Lady Selene's sharp green eyes missed nothing. She watched the prince's face soften, noted how his gaze followed the maid's retreating form. Her painted lips curved in a calculating smile as she lifted her own glass, mind already turning over this interesting development. After the endless courses were finally cleared, the nobles dispersed to their evening entertainments. Alaric slipped away from the crowd, his feet carrying him to the castle's small chapel. The familiar scent of beeswax candles and ancient stone welcomed him as he pushed open the heavy wooden door. Magda stood near the altar, arranging fresh flowers in a simple clay vase. She startled at his entrance, but did not flee, though her hands trembled slightly as she set down the last stem. "Your Highness," she murmured, dropping into a curtsy. "Please," Alaric said softly, moving closer. "When we are alone, can we not speak as we did when I was ill? As friends?" "That would not be proper, my lord." But she did not move away as he approached the altar rail. "Proper?" His voice held a note of bitterness. "Like the proper marriages they discussed tonight." He turned to face her fully. "Were you born noble, Magda, I would choose you above all others. Your kindness, your strength, these mean more than any title." Their hands rested on the altar rail, so close they nearly touched. Magda's breath caught as his fingers moved slightly closer, just brushing against hers. The contact, though slight, sent warmth spreading through her entire body. The deep toll of the evening bell shattered the moment. Magda withdrew her hand as if burned, backing away from the rail. "I must go," she whispered, though every part of her ached to stay. "Magda," Alaric began, but she was already hurrying toward the door, her skirts rustling against the stone floor. Doc left alone, Magda sank to her knees before the altar. The chapel had grown dark, with only a few guttering candles casting long shadows on the walls. Thunder rolled in the distance, a storm approaching the castle. She pressed her clasped hands to her heart, torn between the soaring joy of Alaric's words and the crushing weight of reality. "Dear God," she whispered into the darkness as thunder growled again, closer now. "What am I to do?" Morning sunlight warmed the castle's herb garden as Magda knelt among the fragrant plants, her basket slowly filling with fresh rosemary and thyme. The medicinal section needed tending, though her mind wandered to the previous night's events in the chapel. A shadow fell across her work, and her heart skipped as she recognized the polished boots before her. "Good morrow, Magda," Prince Alaric said quietly. "I trust the apothecary stocks are well maintained?" She rose quickly, brushing soil from her apron. "Yes, Your Highness. We keep careful count of all healing herbs." "Excellent. Pray, show me your work." His voice carried clearly enough for any passing servants to hear, but his eyes held a different message, and so began their daily meetings, carefully arranged to seem innocent to watching eyes. In the herb garden, behind the stables, near the kitchen gardens, anywhere they might speak privately while maintaining the appearance of routine castle business. One quiet afternoon, sheltered by the shadow of an ancient oak, Magda spoke of her childhood village. "The winter was harsh last year, my lord. 3 children died of fever because their families could not afford medicine." Alaric's face darkened with concern. "Tell me more. What other hardships do they face?" "The grain tax leaves little for seed come spring," she explained, her voice soft but passionate. "And the miller charges dear for grinding what little they have. Some mothers go hungry so their children might eat." Day by day, Magda opened his eyes to the real lives of his future subjects. She told him of old widows gathering firewood in the forest, of farmers' wives walking miles to market with heavy baskets, of children working alongside their parents in the fields. In return, Alaric shared his dreams for the kingdom. "Imagine a land where worth is measured by kindness rather than birth," he said one day, as they stood in the cool shade of the bell tower. "Where wisdom matters more than wealth." He began bringing her small books of poetry, teaching her new words when they met. Her favorite was a verse about a nightingale that sang of freedom. Sometimes he would read quietly while she worked, his cultured voice giving life to words of beauty and hope. Their moments together, though brief, grew precious. A shared glance across the courtyard, a subtle smile as they passed in corridors, the brush of fingers as she served his wine, each small connection made Magda's heart flutter. She saw the same yearning in Alaric's eyes, carefully hidden from others, but clear to her. They spoke of everything and nothing. His childhood dreams of adventure, her skill with healing herbs, their shared love of summer storms and morning prayers. Each conversation wove their hearts closer together, despite the impossible gulf between their stations. One evening, as the moon rose full and bright over the castle walls, Magda carried her water bucket back from the well. The weight made her steps slow, and shadows danced across the cobblestones. A figure emerged from the darkness, and she nearly dropped her bucket when she recognized Alaric. "Let me help you," he whispered, taking the heavy bucket from her hands. Their fingers touched in the passing, sending sparks through her skin. "Someone might see," she protested weakly, but did not move away. Alaric set the bucket down carefully. "I cannot bear to simply watch you from afar any longer." His voice was rough with emotion. He took her hand in his, and before she could protest, raised it to his lips. The kiss was gentle, barely more than a breath against her knuckles, but it shook Magda to her core. Her whole body trembled at this forbidden intimacy, this crossing of boundaries that could never be uncrossed. Yet, as she looked into Alaric's eyes, gleaming silver in the moonlight, she knew her heart was already lost. They stood frozen in that moment, her hands still clasped in his, the night air sweet with jasmine from the garden. Finally, Magda squeezed his fingers once, then slowly withdrew her hand. Without a word, she picked up her bucket and hurried away, but her steps were steady and her head held high. Whatever came next, she would face it with courage. The harvest moon hung like a golden lantern above the village square, its light mixing with the warm glow of torches and bonfires. Two figures made their way through the celebrating crowds, one in the simple garb of a soldier, the other in a modest peasant dress. Prince Alaric had traded his fine silk doublet for rough wool, while Magda wore her best dress, though it was plain compared to the court fashions she usually tended. "No one will know me here," Alaric assured her quietly, adjusting the common soldier's cap that hid his distinctive golden hair. "Tonight, I am simply Alaric, and you are simply Magda." The village square buzzed with life and laughter. Children darted between market stalls decorated with autumn leaves and late-blooming flowers. The scent of roasted apples and fresh bread wafted through the crisp evening air. Musicians played lively tunes on fiddles and drums, while villagers danced in circles around the central bonfire. "I shouldn't be here with you," Magda whispered, though her eyes sparkled at the festive scene. "If anyone from the castle, look around," Alaric interrupted gently. "Do you see any palace folk? Tonight we are just two people at a harvest celebration." A group of children ran past, chasing wooden hoops with sticks. One small girl stumbled, and Magda instantly reached out to steady her. The child beamed up at her. "Thank you, miss. Would you like to dance?" Before Magda could answer, the girl had grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the circle of dancers. Alaric laughed and followed, joining the line of villagers moving to the music's cheerful rhythm. Round and round they went, changing partners with each verse, until finally Magda found herself facing Alaric. Their eyes met as they turned together, his hand warm against hers. For those precious moments, the rest of the world fell away. Magda forgot about rank and duty, lost in the simple joy of dancing with the man she loved. "You dance beautifully," an old woman commented, as they caught their breath afterward. "Such a handsome couple." "God bless your courtship." Magda blushed deeply, but Alaric smiled and thanked the woman with the easy manner he showed to all common folk. He led Magda to a nearby stall, where apples roasted on sticks over glowing coals. "When was the last time you truly celebrated?" he asked, passing her a warm apple dusted with cinnamon. "I cannot remember," she admitted, savoring the sweet taste. "Not since," she trailed off, old pain flickering in her eyes. "Then we must make new memories," Alaric said firmly. He guided her through the festival, stopping to watch puppet shows that made children squeal with delight, and to listen to old men tell tales of harvests past. Magda found herself laughing more than she had in years. The villagers' warm acceptance wrapped around her like a comfortable shawl. Here, no one whispered about her past or judged her worth by her station. She was simply a young woman being courted by a kind-hearted soldier. But as the moon rose higher and the fires burned lower, reality began creeping back. They could not stay in this dream forever. Alaric noticed her expression change and squeezed her hand gently. "We should return," he said softly. They walked back toward the castle, their way lit by Alaric's swinging lantern. The sounds of celebration faded behind them, replaced by cricket song and the rustle of autumn leaves. The castle's dark shape loomed ahead, its windows gleaming like distant stars. Just before they reached the gates, Magda paused. "This night will live in my heart forever," she whispered. The heavy gates creaked open at their approach. As they swung shut behind them with a final clang, the spell was broken. Once more, they were prince and servant, separated by walls of stone and centuries of tradition. Lady Selene paced the sunny Lady Solar, her silk skirts rustling against the rushes scattered on the stone floor. The afternoon light streamed through leaded glass windows, warming the chamber where noble ladies typically gathered to sew and gossip. Today, however, only the two young maids were present, whispering in a corner as they sorted linens. "Did you hear about that fallen woman?" One maid murmured to the other. "The one who works in the kitchens? Magda? What of her?" The second maid replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Lady Selene's steps slowed, her ears catching the hushed conversation. She moved closer to the tapestry hanging near them, pretending to admire its weathered threads. "They say she had a child years ago, a soldier's bastard that didn't survive the winter." Selene's painted lips curved into a cruel smile. She turned suddenly, making both maids jump. "How fascinating," she purred, reaching into her embroidered purse. 2 silver coins glinted in her palm. "Tell me more about this unfortunate tale." The maids exchanged nervous glances, but the coins proved too tempting. Soon they were spilling everything they knew, how young Magda had been, the soldier's promises of marriage, his departure with his regiment, the tragic end of her infant during a harsh winter. "And now she dares catch the prince's eye," Selene murmured, her voice thick with satisfaction. "How very interesting." That evening, the great hall blazed with candlelight. Nobles gathered for supper, their jewels glittering as servants moved quietly among them. The Dowager Duchess sat at the high table, her stern gaze sweeping the room. Prince Alaric sat beside her, his eyes following Magda as she served wine with careful grace. Lady Selene waited until the hall was full, timing her strike perfectly. She raised her voice just enough to carry across the nearest tables. "Your Grace," she called sweetly to the Duchess, "I wonder if you've heard the fascinating history of your son's chosen confidant." The room grew quiet. Magda froze, the wine pitcher trembling in her hands. "What can you mean, Lady Selene?" The Duchess asked sharply. "Why, the kitchen maid who's caught our dear prince's attention." Selene's voice dripped with false concern. "The one who once lay with a common soldier and bore his child. Quite the scandal, though the baby didn't survive, poor thing." Gasps echoed through the hall. Goblets clattered against wood. Alaric half rose from his seat, his face white with fury, but the Duchess's hand clamped onto his arm. "Guards!" The Duchess's voice rang out like steel on stone. "Remove that woman from my household at once. Such shame cannot be tolerated in this castle." 2 guards stepped forward, their mail shirts jingling as they moved toward Magda. The wine pitcher slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor in a spray of red that stained her skirts like blood. "Please," Magda whispered, but no one moved to help her. Even the other servants turned away, fear of association clear on their faces. "You have 1 hour to gather your belongings," the Duchess commanded. "Then you will leave this castle and never return." Thunder growled outside as Magda was marched to the servants' quarters. She packed her few possessions with trembling hands, a prayer book, a small cross, the precious scrap of parchment with Alaric's psalm verse. Rain lashed against the narrow window as the guards returned to escort her out at the great doors. Magda turned for one last look. Through the rain-streaked windows above, she could see Alaric standing alone, his fists clenched at his sides. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, all their dreams of love despite station, all their hopes of changing ancient prejudices, seemed to shatter like the wine pitcher on the floor. The guards pulled open the heavy doors, and the storm's fury swept in. Magda stepped out into the darkness, clutching her small bundle to her chest. As the castle doors closed behind her with the finality of a tomb, dawn broke cold and gray as Magda trudged along the muddy road leading away from the castle. Her worn shoes offered little protection from the wet earth, and her simple wool cloak grew heavy with morning mist. The few possessions she owned were bundled in a cloth sack that she clutched close. The first drops of rain began to fall. Magda quickened her pace, scanning the countryside for shelter. Up ahead, a weathered barn stood sentinel in a farmer's field. She hurried toward it, slipping through a gap in the wooden slats. Inside, the musty scent of hay and livestock brought memories of her childhood flooding back. She settled onto a pile of straw, grateful for its warmth, if not its comfort. "Lord above, give me strength," she whispered, wrapping her cloak tighter around her shoulders. When the rain finally ceased, she continued her journey. It took 3 days of walking and sleeping in barns before she reached her village. The familiar sight of her aunt's old cottage, with its thatched roof and smoke-darkened walls, brought tears to her eyes. She had inherited it years ago, but hadn't lived there since taking service at the castle. Inside, everything remained as she'd left it. The wooden table where her aunt had taught her to sew, the spinning wheel in the corner, even the faded cushions on the bench by the hearth. Magda set down her bundle and got to work, sweeping away cobwebs and dust. By nightfall, she had a small fire burning and had arranged her meager belongings. Meanwhile, within the castle's stone walls, Prince Alaric faced his own struggles. The council chamber echoed with heated voices as advisors pressed him about Lady Selene. "Your Grace, the scandal must be addressed," Lord Chancellor Morton insisted, his jowls quivering. A royal betrothal to Lady Selene would silence all gossip. Alaric's jaw tightened. "I have no wish to marry her." The Dowager Duchess swept into the chamber, her black silk gown rustling against the flagstones. "You have no choice, my son. The crown's dignity must be preserved." Day after day, Alaric wrote letters to Magda, pouring out his heart onto parchment. "My dearest," one began, "know that my heart remains constant. Whatever they force upon me, I shall find a way." But the letters never reached her. Lady Selene's network of spies intercepted each one, delivering them straight to her waiting hands in her cottage. Magda threw herself into her work. Her skilled fingers created fine stitches on villagers' clothing, earning her a modest living. Each morning, she watched hopefully as the post rider passed through the village square. But no word ever came. The pressure on Alaric mounted. His mother's words became sharper, the council's demands more insistent. Lady Selene appeared at every turn, her smile triumphant as she sensed his weakening resolve. Finally, after weeks of resistance, Alaric stood in the great hall, his face a mask of resignation. The assembled courtiers waited in expectant silence as he spoke the words that felt like ashes in his mouth. "We hereby announce our betrothal to Lady Selene of House Blackthorn." The hall erupted in applause. Lady Selene stepped forward, radiant in azure silk, to accept his formal bow. Only the Dowager Duchess noticed how her son's hands trembled. The news traveled swiftly across the countryside. 3 days later, the post rider clip-clopped through Magda's village, distributing the official proclamation to be read in every town square. Magda sat at her sewing table, afternoon light streaming through her cottage window as she worked on a child's dress. The sound of horses' hooves made her look up. Her elderly neighbor, Goodwife Agnes, appeared at her door, clutching a piece of parchment. "Child," the old woman said softly, "you should know." Magda took the proclamation with shaking hands. The words swam before her eyes. His Royal Highness Prince Alaric to wed Lady Selene. The parchment slipped from her fingers, floating to the floor like a fallen leaf. Magda's shoulders began to shake as silent tears fell onto the half-finished dress in her lap, her heart breaking anew with each bitter drop. The weeks crept by like autumn shadows lengthening across the village square. Magda sat in her aunt's old cottage, the familiar click of her needle marking time as she mended torn shirts and patched worn breeches. Through the small window, she could see the village life continuing as it always had: women drawing water from the well, farmers leading their oxen to the fields, children chasing each other between the market stalls. Her fingers moved steadily, pushing the needle through rough fabric. This was her life, now simple work for simple folk. Each morning, villagers would leave their mending at her door, and each evening, they would collect their repaired garments, leaving copper pennies wrapped in scraps of cloth. That every Sunday, Magda walked to church, her head held high despite the whispers that followed her like autumn leaves in the wind. "There goes the fallen one," they would murmur, these people who had known her since childhood. The castle maid who forgot her place. Yet not all voices carried judgment. The village priest greeted her warmly each week, his kind eyes showing no condemnation. "God's grace knows no boundaries, child," he would say, pressing her hand in blessing. The children of the village, innocent of adult prejudices, still gathered around her doorstep. They brought her wildflowers and told her their small troubles, drawn by the gentleness in her eyes and her patient way of listening. Little Marie with her torn pinafore, young Thomas with his tales of adventure. They saw only the woman who would mend their clothes and sometimes share a honey cake from her meager stores. As summer mellowed into autumn, Magda noticed a subtle change in the villagers' attitudes. It began with goodwife Ellen defending her at the market. "Say what you will," the baker's wife declared loudly to a group of gossips. But when my Thomas was sick with fever, it was Magda who sat with him through the night, asking nothing in return. Others began to speak up too. "She mends my children's clothes for half what she could charge," said the miller's wife. "And have you seen how she helps old widow Barnes with her washing?" The whispers didn't stop entirely, but they changed tone. "Such a shame," they would say now. "She has such a good heart." Then came the news that shattered her carefully rebuilt world. The postwriter brought word from the castle. Prince Alaric's betrothal ceremony to Lady Selene would be held at Michaelmas. Less than 14 days away. Magda's hands trembled as she counted the days on her worn prayer beads. Michaelmas, the feast of St. Michael, when summer truly surrendered to autumn. The day when accounts were settled and new beginnings marked. Outfitting, she thought bitterly, that it should mark the end of her dreams. That evening, as the sun set behind the village church, Magda knelt beside her narrow bed. The rough wooden floorboards pressed against her knees, but she welcomed the discomfort. It helped her focus on her prayers rather than the ache in her heart. "Dear Lord," she whispered into the gathering darkness, "I surrender my hope of love. Take it from me, if it be your will." Tears fell silently down her cheeks as she continued, "But please, I beg you, bless Prince Alaric's reign. Give him the wisdom to rule with compassion, even without me by his side." The only answer was the evening breeze rustling through the cottage's thatched roof and the distant sound of the village settling down for the night. Magda remained kneeling, her prayers becoming more fervent as darkness filled the small room. "Let him be happy," she whispered. "Let him be the king I know he can be. And help me to find peace in your will." Michaelmas Day dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the cathedral's towering stained glass windows. Inside, hundreds of beeswax candles blazed in golden holders, their light dancing across jeweled brooches and silk gowns. The air was heavy with incense and the rustle of fine fabrics as nobles filled the carved wooden pews dot at the altar. Lady Selene stood resplendent in a gown of ivory silk, precious gems glittering at her throat and wrists. Her triumphant smile gleamed as bright as the diamonds in her hair. Behind her, the great rose window cast patterns of colored light across the stone floor, where red and purple blooms marked the path the prince would walk. A hush fell over the gathering as Prince Alaric appeared at the cathedral doors. His face was set in grim lines as he began his slow march down the aisle, each step measured and heavy. The court musicians played a stately processional, but there was no joy in the prince's bearing as he approached the altar dot in the very last pew. Hidden among a group of common villagers who had come to witness the spectacle, sat Magda. Her plain wool dress marked her as clearly as the noble silks marked them, but her bearing held a quiet dignity. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap as she watched the man she loved walk toward another. The bishop began the ceremony, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. But just as he spoke the first words of the marriage rites, Prince Alaric raised his hand. "I cannot," he declared, his voice ringing clear and strong through the hushed cathedral. "I cannot and will not speak these vows." Lady Selene's face contorted in shock. Gasps rippled through the congregation like wind through wheat. The prince turned to face the assembled nobility, his shoulders straight and proud. "My heart belongs to another," he proclaimed, "to one whose nobility comes not from birth, but from the purity of her soul and the kindness of her actions." His eyes found Magda in the back pew. "Magda, come forward." The whispers grew to a roar as Magda rose, trembling but resolute. She walked slowly down the aisle, past the stunned faces of dukes and countesses, past Lady Selene, who stood frozen in disbelief. "This is outrageous." Lady Selene's shriek cut through the murmurs. "She is nothing but a common maid, a fallen woman." The Dowager Duchess rose from her seat, her face pale with anger. But before she could speak, Prince Alaric strode to meet Magda halfway down the aisle. There, before the entire court, he dropped to one knee. "You are the truest noble I have ever known," he said, taking her work-roughened hands in his. "Your heart holds more grace than all the jewels in this cathedral. If you will have me, I would make you my bride and my queen." The congregation erupted into chaos. Some nobles stood in outrage, while others remained seated, moved by the prince's declaration. The bishop looked uncertainly between Alaric and the duchess, his hands fidgeting with his prayer book. Through it all, Magda and Alaric remained still, their joined hands steady, their eyes locked in a gaze that spoke of love stronger than protocol or tradition. Lady Selene's face had twisted into a mask of fury, her carefully arranged curls falling loose as she gestured wildly, demanding justice. The priest stood frozen at the altar, his eyes fixed on the Dowager Duchess. The entire cathedral seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her verdict. Would she allow her only son to break with centuries of tradition? Or would duty and pride win out over the clear love shining in Alaric's eyes as he knelt before his chosen bride? The whispers continued to ripple through the congregation, half scandalized, half moved by the scene before them. Magda's hands trembled in Alaric's grasp, but her chin remained high, ready to face whatever judgment would come. The silence in the cathedral stretched like drawn silk. All eyes turned to the Dowager Duchess, who stood as still as the marble statues lining the walls. Her face, usually stern with pride, showed the first hints of softening as she gazed at Magda and Alaric. Finally, she stepped forward, her silk skirts rustling against the stone floor. "In all my years at court," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space, "I have seen countless noble ladies vie for position and power. Yet none has shown the quiet strength I have witnessed in this woman." Magda's eyes widened as the Duchess continued. "You bore shame with dignity. You served without complaint. When cast out, you rebuilt your life with honest work. The Duchess's voice grew warmer. These are the qualities of true nobility, not birth, not wealth, but character tested by fire and found pure. She turned to address the assembled court. My son speaks truth. This woman has shown more nobility in her humble service than many born to title. Then, facing Alaric and Magda directly, she declared, "You have my blessing." A collective gasp rose from the congregation. Lady Selene stormed from the altar in a swish of ivory silk, but few noticed her departure. The bishop, recovering his composure, stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Your Grace," he said to the Duchess, "with your permission, and by right of royal license, I shall dispense with the traditional banns." At her nod, he beckoned Alaric and Magda to the altar. The cathedral's countless candles cast their golden light upon the couple as they stood before God and witnesses. Magda's simple wool dress seemed transformed by the glow, her face radiant with joy. Alaric took her hands in his eyes never leaving hers as they spoke their vows. "I do take thee." His voice rang clear and sure. "I do take thee?" Magda echoed, her words soft but steady as the bishop pronounced them man and wife. The great cathedral bells began to toll, their joyous pealing through hundreds of villagers who had gathered in the square outside. When Alaric and Magda emerged into the autumn sunshine, they were met with a roar of cheers from the common folk who had long known and loved the kind-hearted seamstress. Children darted forward, tossing brilliant red and gold leaves into the air. The fallen foliage danced around the newlyweds like nature's own celebration. Market women wiped tears from their eyes, and even the gruffest farmers removed their caps in respect. Inside the cathedral, noble lords and ladies who had arrived expecting a very different ceremony found themselves bowing to the inevitable. The power of Alaric's declaration and the Duchess's unexpected support transformed their shock into reluctant acceptance. One by one, they came forward to offer congratulations, their courtly manners masking varied degrees of adjustment to this new reality. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.